Marcus Thompson wheeled his chair across the smooth wooden floors of his new home, the morning sun streaming through the large windows that overlooked the Pacific coastline. The house sat on a cliff about 200 feet above the crashing waves, a dream home that he and his wife Sarah had talked about buying for years. Now, 18 months after the IED explosion in Afghanistan had taken his legs, they finally had it. The German shepherd named Rex padded alongside the wheelchair, his amber eyes always watching, always alert. The dog had been Marcus's constant companion since he returned from the war, a service animal trained to help with daily tasks but who had become so much more. Rex seemed to understand things that others couldn't, picking up on Marcus's moods before Marcus himself realized what he was feeling. Sarah emerged from the kitchen carrying a cup of coffee, her blonde hair tied back in a messy bun. She looked tired, older than her 32 years. The stress of the past year and a half had worn on both of them, but Marcus noticed it more in her lately. She barely smiled anymore, and when she did, it never quite reached her eyes. "Beautiful morning," Marcus said, accepting the coffee and taking a sip. The bitter warmth felt good against the cool ocean breeze that drifted through the open patio doors. Sarah replied, not really looking at the view. She was scrolling through her phone, her attention somewhere else entirely. Marcus had met Sarah 5 years ago at a charity event for wounded veterans. She worked for a nonprofit organization and had been so passionate about helping soldiers transition back to civilian life. Her energy and compassion had drawn him in immediately. She was the kind of woman who volunteered at animal shelters on weekends and cried during commercials about hungry children. When he deployed to Afghanistan, she wrote him letters every single day, sometimes twice a day. Her words had kept him going through the darkest moments overseas. But something had changed since he came back. At first, Marcus thought it was natural adjustment. Anyone would struggle with the reality of caring for a paralyzed spouse. The daily routines were different, the spontaneity was gone, and the future they had planned together needed to be completely reimagined. He tried to be patient, to give her space to process everything. The financial stress hadn't helped either. Medical bills piled up despite the VA coverage, and Marcus's disability payments weren't enough to maintain their previous lifestyle. Sarah had to work longer hours to make up the difference, coming home exhausted and frustrated. They had argued more in the past 6 months than in all their previous years together. Rex sensed the tension too. The dog would position himself between Marcus and Sarah during their heated discussions, as if trying to create a buffer. Sometimes Marcus caught Rex staring at Sarah with an expression that seemed almost suspicious, which was unusual for the normally friendly animal. "I'm going into town today," Sarah announced, still looking at her phone. "Need to run some errands. Want company?" Marcus asked, though he already knew what her answer would be. "No, it's faster if I go alone. You know how crowded the stores get, and with the wheelchair." She trailed off, but Marcus heard the unspoken words. He was an inconvenience, a complication that made simple tasks more difficult. After Sarah left, Marcus wheeled himself out onto the wooden deck that extended from their living room. The view was breathtaking. Endless blue ocean stretching to the horizon, seabirds riding the updrafts along the cliff face, and waves that crashed against the rocks below with hypnotic regularity. He had chosen this house partly because of this deck, imagining peaceful mornings spent here with Sarah, watching the sunrise together. Rex lay down beside the wheelchair, his head resting on his paws but his ears still alert. The dog was always listening, always watching for anything unusual. It was a trait that had served them well during Marcus's recovery. But lately Rex seemed more anxious than usual, especially around Sarah. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through messages from his old Marine buddies. They checked in regularly, sharing stories and dark humor that helped him feel connected to his former life. Tommy Rodriguez had sent a photo from his new job as a security consultant, giving a thumbs up in front of some corporate building. Jake Williams was getting married next month and wanted Marcus to be his best man. The responses to these messages used to come easily, but now Marcus found himself staring at the screen, struggling to find words. How could he explain that his marriage was falling apart? That his wife looked at him like he was a burden she couldn't wait to escape? That he sometimes wondered if she would be better off if he had died in Afghanistan instead of coming home broken? Rex suddenly lifted his head, ears perked forward. Marcus followed the dog's gaze and saw Sarah's car pulling into the driveway, much earlier than expected. She usually spent hours in town, sometimes not returning until evening. Today she had been gone less than 2 hours. Sarah walked into the house carrying only a small bag, not the multiple shopping bags Marcus had expected. She seemed different somehow, more energetic than she had been in months, but also nervous, fidgety in a way that set Marcus on edge. "How were the errands?" he asked as she passed through the living room. "Fine," she replied quickly. "Just picked up a few things." Rex had risen to his feet and was watching Sarah intently. The dog's body language was tense, alert in the way he got when something was wrong. Marcus had learned to trust Rex's instincts completely. The dog had saved his life more than once by detecting dangers that Marcus couldn't see or hear. That evening, Sarah cooked dinner, something she rarely did anymore. She seemed almost manic in her cheerfulness, talking rapidly about trivial things while avoiding eye contact. Marcus tried to engage with her enthusiasm, but something felt forced, artificial about her behavior. As they ate, Rex positioned himself closer to Marcus than usual, his eyes never leaving Sarah. When she reached across the table to pour more wine, the dog's ears flattened slightly against his head, a sign of stress that Marcus recognized immediately. Later that night, as Marcus transferred from his wheelchair to bed, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She grabbed it quickly, too quickly, and turned away to read it. In the reflection of the bedroom mirror, Marcus caught a glimpse of her face as she typed a response. She was smiling, but it wasn't the tired, strained smile she had been giving him lately. This was different, secretive and excited. Rex settled on the floor beside Marcus's side of the bed, but instead of his usual relaxed position, the dog remained alert, his head up and ears forward. Throughout the night, Marcus was vaguely aware of Rex shifting position occasionally, as if the dog was keeping watch over something more than just his master's sleep. The next few weeks brought subtle changes that Marcus couldn't quite put his finger on. Sarah's mood swings became more pronounced, periods of unusual happiness followed by dark silence that could last for days. She started taking long walks alone along the cliff path, claiming she needed exercise and fresh air. When Marcus offered to join her, she always found excuses why the rocky terrain wouldn't work with his wheelchair. Rex's behavior became increasingly protective. The dog rarely left Marcus's side, even following him into the bathroom, which wasn't typical. During Sarah's absences, Rex would position himself by the front window, watching the driveway with an intensity that seemed almost human in its focus. One afternoon, while Sarah was out on another mysterious errand, Marcus decided to call his old squad leader, Sergeant First Class Martinez, who now worked as a counselor for veterans dealing with PTSD and adjustment issues. "Hey, Gunny," Marcus said when Martinez picked up. "Got a minute to talk?" "Always got time for you, Thompson. What's eating at you?" Marcus found himself pouring out his concerns about Sarah, about their relationship, about the growing distance between them. Martinez listened without interruption, something he had always been good at. "Sounds rough, Marine. How long has this been going on?" "Gradually for months, but it's gotten worse recently. She's different, secretive. And Rex has been acting strange too, like he doesn't trust her anymore. Dogs pick up on things we miss sometimes," Martinez said thoughtfully. "Trust your instincts and trust that dog. He's been looking out for you this whole time, hasn't he?" After the call, Marcus sat on the deck with Rex beside him, thinking about Martinez's words. The dog's training had been extensive. He could detect seizures before they happened, alert to panic attacks, even sense when Marcus's blood pressure was rising dangerously. But Rex's recent behavior seemed to go beyond medical alerts. It was as if the dog sensed a threat that Marcus couldn't identify. That evening, Sarah announced she had invited her sister Linda to visit the following week. This was surprising because Sarah and Linda had never been particularly close, and Linda lived nearly 300 miles away in Sacramento. "That's nice," Marcus said carefully. "Any special reason for the visit?" "Can I want to see my sister?" Sarah snapped, then immediately softened her tone. "Sorry, I just think it would be good to have family around. We've been so isolated out here." The comment stung because Marcus knew Sarah was the one who had chosen this isolated location. She had insisted they needed privacy, space to adjust to their new reality without neighbors constantly checking on them or offering unwanted help. Rex had been lying quietly beside Marcus's wheelchair, but at Sarah's sharp tone, the dog's head lifted and his ears pressed forward. Marcus reached down to stroke Rex's neck, feeling the slight tension in the animal's muscles. Linda arrived on a Thursday, driving a rented SUV and carrying expensive luggage that seemed excessive for a weekend visit. She was younger than Sarah by 2 years, with the same blonde hair, but a harder edge to her personality. Marcus had only met her a few times over the years, and she had always seemed impatient with what she called Sarah's bleeding heart tendencies. From the moment Linda entered the house, Rex's demeanor changed dramatically. The dog's hackles didn't raise, but his body language became rigid, watchful. He followed Linda with his eyes everywhere she went, and when she tried to pet him, he politely but firmly moved away. "Friendly dog," Linda commented with obvious sarcasm. "He's usually very social," Marcus replied, puzzled by Rex's reaction. "Must just need time to warm up to you." The two sisters spent hours talking in hushed voices, stopping abruptly whenever Marcus wheeled into the room. They claimed to be catching up on family gossip, but their body language suggested something more serious. Linda kept glancing at Marcus with an expression he couldn't read, while Sarah seemed nervous, playing with her wedding ring in a way that had become a habit lately. On Linda's second night, Marcus woke around 2 in the morning to use the bathroom. As he transferred from bed to wheelchair, he heard voices from the living room, Sarah and Linda talking in urgent whispers. Rex was already awake, sitting alert beside the bed with his ears cocked toward the door. Marcus wheeled quietly to the bedroom doorway, staying in the shadows where he could listen without being seen. Rex followed silently, positioning himself between Marcus and the hallway as if standing guard. "Can't keep living like this," Linda was saying. "You're 32 years old, Sarah. You've got your whole life ahead of you." "It's not that simple," Sarah replied, her voice tight with stress. "He's my husband. He needs me. He's got the VA, he's got that dog, he's got disability payments. He'd be fine in one of those assisted living places for veterans. You're not responsible for taking care of him forever." Marcus felt his blood turn cold. Rex must have sensed his emotional state because the dog moved closer, pressing against the side of his wheelchair in a comforting gesture. "I can't just abandon him," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You're not abandoning him. You're giving yourself permission to have a life. Think about it. When was the last time you were really happy? When was the last time you could do what you wanted without worrying about wheelchair accessibility, or medical appointments, or whether he was having a bad day?" There was a long pause before Sarah spoke again. "There's the insurance money, too. If something happened to him." Marcus's hands gripped his wheelchair armrest so tightly his knuckles went white. Rex whined softly, pressing closer against him. "Don't even think like that," Linda said quickly. "I'm not talking about anything like that. I'm just saying you need to consider your options. Maybe a trial separation, maybe counseling, maybe other solutions." The conversation continued for another few minutes, but Marcus had heard enough. He wheeled back to bed as quietly as possible, his mind reeling from what he had overheard. Rex settled beside the bed but remained alert, his breathing slightly elevated as if he too understood that something dangerous was developing. Marcus lay awake the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what he had learned. Sarah was unhappy, that much he had known. But hearing her discuss him like a burden to be disposed of, hearing her sister encourage her to abandon their marriage, cut deeper than any physical wound he had ever received. The mention of insurance money was particularly chilling. Marcus had a substantial life insurance policy through his military service, plus additional coverage they had purchased when they bought the house. Sarah would be financially secure if he died, probably better off than she was now with his medical expenses and reduced earning capacity. But surely Sarah wouldn't. No, he couldn't let his mind go there. His wife might be struggling with their situation. She might be having doubts about their future together. But she wasn't capable of actually harming him. Was she? Rex seemed to disagree. The dog's behavior over the following days became even more protective, almost possessive. He refused to let Sarah approach Marcus when they were alone together, positioning himself between them with a determination that bordered on aggressive. When Sarah tried to help Marcus with tasks that normally fell to her, transferring to his wheelchair, reaching items from high shelves, Rex would intervene, performing the assistance himself or alerting Marcus to handle it independently. Linda left after 4 days, but not before having several more whispered conversations with Sarah. On her final evening, Marcus caught them looking at him across the dinner table with expressions that made his skin crawl. Linda's gaze was calculating, almost predatory, while Sarah looked guilty and conflicted. After Linda's departure, Sarah's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would disappear for hours without explanation, return with no purchases despite claiming to have been shopping, and spend long periods staring out at the ocean with an expression Marcus had never seen before. Cold, distant, almost calculating. Rex's vigilance intensified correspondingly. The dog barely slept, maintaining a constant watch over Marcus that went far beyond his normal service animal duties. It was as if Rex sensed that something terrible was approaching, and he had appointed himself as Marcus's only line of defense. The standoff continued for several tense minutes. Sarah kept insisting she just wanted to take photos, while Rex maintained his protective position between her and Marcus's wheelchair. The dog's eyes never left Sarah's hands, tracking her every movement with laser focus. "You know what, maybe Rex is right," Marcus said finally, trying to keep his voice casual. "This wind is pretty strong up here. Might be safer to move back from the edge." Sarah's face flashed with frustration before she forced another smile. "Don't be silly. The railing is perfectly safe and the view is incredible from here. Just 1 or 2 photos, then we can have our picnic." She stepped toward the wheelchair again, this time reaching for the handles as if to push Marcus into a better position. Rex's response was immediate and decisive. The dog lunged forward, not attacking but intercepting Sarah's movement with his body, forcing her to step backward or risk falling over him. "Rex, down," Sarah commanded sharply, her artificial sweetness finally completely gone. "Stay." The dog ignored her completely, maintaining his protective stance with unwavering determination. His ears were flat against his head now, and a low rumble emanated from his chest. Not quite a growl, but close enough to make Sarah hesitate. Marcus knew he had to act. Rex was doing everything possible to protect him, but the dog couldn't prevent what Sarah was planning indefinitely. Marcus began wheeling his chair backward away from the cliff edge, but Sarah quickly moved to block his retreat. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. "We just got here." "I thought you wanted to see the view." "I did see it." "It's beautiful, but I'm getting cold. And Rex is obviously stressed about something. Maybe we should head back." Sarah's mask slipped further. "We're not going anywhere." "Not yet." The words hung in the air like a threat. Rex sensed the change in tone immediately, his stance becoming even more aggressive. The dog was no longer just being protective. He was preparing for battle. Marcus realized that Sarah had planned this carefully. They were alone on a remote clifftop with no witnesses and no help available. She had maneuvered him into the most vulnerable position possible, with his back to a 300-foot drop and no way to escape quickly in his wheelchair. But she hadn't counted on Rex. "Sarah," Marcus said carefully, "what's really going on here? Talk to me." For a moment, her composure cracked completely. All the frustration, resentment, and desperation of the past 18 months poured out in a torrent of words. "What's going on? What's going on is that I can't live like this anymore, Marcus. I can't be your caregiver for the rest of my life. I can't pretend that this is what I signed up for when I married you. I never asked you to. You didn't have to ask. It was expected. The devoted military wife, standing by her wounded hero no matter what. But you know what? I'm tired of being devoted. I'm tired of my entire life revolving around your medical appointments and your therapy sessions and your wheelchair accessibility." Rex's rumbling grew louder. The dog could sense the escalating tension and was preparing to defend Marcus against whatever threat Sarah represented. "I had a life before this," Sarah continued, her voice rising with emotion. "I had dreams, plans, ambitions that didn't involve spending my best years pushing a wheelchair and dealing with insurance companies and pretending that everything is fine when it's not fine at all." Marcus felt his heart breaking, but not entirely from surprise. He had sensed her growing resentment, even if he hadn't wanted to acknowledge it. "Sarah, we can work through this. We can get counseling, figure out a way forward that works for both of us." "There is no way forward," she snapped. "Not as long as you're like this. Not as long as I'm trapped taking care of you." The brutal honesty of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Rex responded to his handler's emotional distress by moving closer to the wheelchair, his protective instincts in overdrive. "So what exactly are you proposing?" Marcus asked quietly. Sarah's eyes darted toward the cliff edge, then back to Marcus. "Accidents happen. People fall from cliffs all the time, especially people in wheelchairs who might lose control near an unstable railing. The words confirmed Marcus's worst fears. Sarah wasn't just planning to leave him. She was planning to kill him and make it look accidental. The insurance money Linda had mentioned would set her free financially, and a tragic accident would generate sympathy rather than suspicion. Rex understood the threat, even if he couldn't understand the words. The dog's entire body was tense, coiled like a spring ready to explode into action. His eyes remained fixed on Sarah, tracking her every movement and ready to intercept any attempt to approach Marcus or the wheelchair. "The dog is a problem, though," Sarah continued, almost talking to herself now. "He won't let me get close enough, and he's strong enough to prevent." "What needs to happen?" She pulled something from her jacket pocket, a small spray bottle that Marcus didn't recognize. "Pepper spray," she explained, seeing his confused look. "For Rex. Once he's disabled, this will be much easier." The mention of pepper spray galvanized Rex into action. The dog might not have understood the specific threat, but he recognized Sarah's aggressive posture and the object in her hand as dangerous. With a bark of warning, Rex positioned himself directly in front of Marcus's wheelchair, his body spread wide to create as large a barrier as possible. "Sarah, don't do this," Marcus pleaded. "Whatever problems we have, we can solve them. You don't have to hurt Rex, and you don't have to hurt me." "I'm not going to hurt you," she said, her voice taking on an eerie calm. "It's going to be quick. One push and it will all be over. You won't suffer, and I'll be free to have the life I deserve." She raised the pepper spray, aiming it at Rex's face. The dog saw the threatening gesture and let out a bark that was part warning, part rage. Rex had endured extensive training to remain calm under pressure, but his protective instincts were overriding everything else. Marcus realized he had one chance. While Sarah was focused on Rex, he could try to wheel himself toward the parking area, but it would mean leaving the dog vulnerable to the pepper spray. Rex was risking everything to protect him, and Marcus couldn't abandon his faithful companion. Instead, Marcus made a desperate gamble. "Sarah, look at me. Look at what you're about to do. This isn't you. The woman I married couldn't hurt anyone, let alone murder her own husband." For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across Sarah's face. The hand holding the pepper spray wavered slightly, and Rex immediately sensed the change in her posture. The dog remained alert but didn't advance, giving her a chance to back down from the confrontation. "I'm not a murderer," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "This is just necessary for both of us, really. You'll never have to worry about being a burden anymore, and I'll never have to feel guilty about resenting you." The twisted logic of her reasoning chilled Marcus to the bone. In Sarah's mind, killing him was almost an act of mercy, freeing him from a life she assumed he found unbearable, and freeing her from obligations she never wanted to fulfill. Rex began backing toward Marcus's wheelchair, never taking his eyes off Sarah but clearly trying to create distance between the threat and his handler. The dog was smart enough to recognize that he couldn't attack Sarah directly without leaving Marcus vulnerable, so he was repositioning for maximum protection. 2 weeks after Linda's departure, Sarah's behavior took another disturbing turn. She began researching hiking trails and scenic viewpoints along the coast, spending hours on her laptop looking at maps and reading reviews of various locations. When Marcus asked about her sudden interest in outdoor activities, she claimed she was planning romantic outings for them to rekindle their relationship. "I think we need to start doing more things together," she explained, her voice artificially bright. "Get out of this house, experience some adventure like we used to." Marcus wanted to believe her, but Rex's continued agitation made him skeptical. The dog had begun sleeping directly beside Marcus's bed, sometimes even climbing onto the mattress despite years of training to stay on the floor. During meals, Rex positioned himself where he could see both Marcus and Sarah simultaneously, his attention split between protecting his handler and watching for potential threats. One afternoon, Sarah suggested they visit a particular overlook she had read about online, a scenic point about 30 miles north where the cliffs were particularly dramatic. She showed Marcus photos on her tablet, breathtaking views of the ocean with a narrow promontory jutting out over the water. "It says here that it's wheelchair accessible," she said, pointing to a review on a travel website. "There's a paved path that leads right to the edge. We could pack a lunch, make a whole day of it." Rex was lying beside Marcus's wheelchair. But at the mention of the cliff overlook, the dog's ears perked up and he lifted his head to stare at Sarah with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable. It was as if Rex understood exactly what was being discussed and didn't approve. "Sounds nice," Marcus said cautiously. "When were you thinking of going?" "This weekend? Saturday, maybe? The weather forecast looks perfect." That night, Marcus lay awake thinking about Sarah's sudden interest in cliffside outings. Combined with what he had overheard during Linda's visit, a dark suspicion began forming in his mind. He tried to push it away, telling himself he was being paranoid, that grief and isolation were making him imagine threats that didn't exist. But Rex's behavior suggested otherwise. The dog had begun following Sarah around the house with an alertness that bordered on stalking. When she cooked, Rex watched her every movement. When she handled Marcus's medication, or helped with his physical therapy routine, Rex inserted himself into the process as if supervising her actions. On Friday evening, Sarah began preparing for their Saturday outing with an enthusiasm that seemed forced. She packed a picnic lunch, charged her camera battery, and even suggested they take Rex along for the exercise. "Dogs aren't usually allowed at those scenic overlooks," Marcus pointed out. "Rex is a service animal," Sarah replied quickly. "He's allowed everywhere you go. Besides, he loves car rides and the fresh air will be good for him." Rex's response to this announcement was immediate and dramatic. The dog began pacing the house, whining softly and repeatedly returning to Marcus's side with obvious distress signals. When Sarah tried to reassure Rex by petting him, the dog moved away and positioned himself protectively beside Marcus's wheelchair. That night, Rex refused to settle down. The dog spent the entire evening moving between the bedroom and the living room, checking doors and windows with behavior that Marcus recognized as a security sweep. During his military service, Marcus had seen guard dogs perform similar patterns when they sensed imminent danger. Around midnight, Marcus heard Sarah get up and move around the house. Through the bedroom door, he could see light from her laptop screen in the living room. She was typing rapidly, pausing occasionally as if thinking carefully about her words. When she finally returned to bed an hour later, she seemed tense and agitated, tossing and turning until dawn. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, mild temperatures and gentle ocean breezes. Sarah was up early, bustling around the house with nervous energy as she prepared for their outing. She had packed an elaborate picnic with Marcus's favorite foods, including wine and chocolate-covered strawberries, as if planning a romantic celebration. Rex's distress escalated throughout the morning. The dog refused to eat his breakfast and followed Marcus everywhere, even pushing between Marcus and Sarah when she tried to help with his morning routine. When Sarah went to the car to load their picnic supplies, Rex positioned himself at the front door and whined continuously until she returned. "What's wrong with him today?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying an edge of irritation. "Not sure," Marcus replied, though he was beginning to understand exactly what was wrong with Rex. The dog's instincts were screaming that danger was approaching, and every attempt to communicate this to his human handler was being ignored. The drive to the scenic overlook took 40 minutes along winding coastal roads. Sarah chatted nervously during the trip, pointing out landmarks and talking about how long it had been since they had taken a romantic drive together. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and Marcus noticed she kept checking the rearview mirror even though there was no traffic behind them. Rex spent the entire drive with his head pressed against the back window, whining softly and occasionally letting out small barks of distress. When Sarah told him to be quiet, the dog ignored her completely, something Rex had never done before. His training had emphasized obedience to all family members, but now he seemed to recognize only Marcus as his pack leader. The overlook was as spectacular as advertised. The parking area sat on a bluff about 300 feet above the ocean, with a paved walkway leading to a fenced viewing area that jutted out over the water. Far below, waves crashed against jagged rocks with mesmerizing regularity. The sound of the surf was constant and hypnotic, and the drop was essentially vertical, with no possibility of survival for anyone who went over the edge. Sarah parked the car and began unloading their supplies with what seemed like excessive enthusiasm. She suggested they wheel Marcus out to the very end of the promontory for the best views, claiming she wanted to take photos of him with the ocean backdrop. Rex's behavior became frantic as they approached the viewing area. The dog kept trying to block the wheelchair's path, running ahead and then returning to Marcus's side with obvious agitation. When Sarah tried to position the wheelchair near the safety railing for better photographs, Rex planted himself between Marcus and the edge, refusing to move despite Sarah's increasingly sharp commands. "What is wrong with this dog?" Sarah demanded, her carefully maintained cheerfulness finally cracking. "Rex, move! Get out of the way!" But Rex held his ground, his body language radiating determination. The dog seemed to understand exactly what was at stake, and he was prepared to defy direct orders to protect his handler. Marcus had never seen Rex disobey commands so blatantly, and the dog's behavior confirmed his worst suspicions about Sarah's intentions. "Maybe we should find a different spot for photos," Marcus suggested carefully, not wanting to reveal his growing alarm. "No, this is perfect," Sarah insisted. "The lighting is exactly right. Rex will settle down in a minute." She moved closer to the wheelchair, ostensibly to adjust Marcus's position for better photographs. Rex immediately responded by placing himself directly between Sarah and Marcus, his stance low and protective. For the first time since Marcus had known him, Rex showed his teeth slightly, not quite a growl, but a clear warning that he would defend his handler at any cost. The three of them stood frozen in a tableau of tension. Sarah frustrated and increasingly desperate, Marcus terrified but trying not to show it, and Rex prepared to fight for his human's life. The only sounds were the crashing waves below and the whistling wind across the clifftop. Marcus realized that his faithful companion had been trying to warn him for weeks. Rex's protective behavior, his suspicion of Sarah, his refusal to let her near Marcus when they were alone, it had all been leading to this moment. The dog had sensed what Marcus's human heart had refused to accept, that the woman he loved was planning to kill him. The tension on the clifftop reached a breaking point. Sarah's hand trembled as she held the pepper spray, her resolve wavering between desperation and doubt. Rex maintained his protective stance, every muscle in his body coiled and ready to spring into action. Marcus sat frozen in his wheelchair, knowing that any sudden movement could trigger the confrontation he was desperately trying to avoid. "Sarah, please," Marcus said softly. "Put down the spray. Let's just talk about this." For a moment it seemed like she might listen. Her arm began to lower, and some of the wild intensity faded from her eyes. Rex sensed the change immediately, his stance relaxing slightly though he remained alert and ready. But then Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message, and whatever moment of hesitation she had experienced vanished completely. She glanced at the screen and her face hardened with renewed determination. "Linda's asking if it's done yet," she said, more to herself than to Marcus. "I told her it would be over by now." The revelation that Linda was actively involved in the murder plot sent a chill through Marcus that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. This wasn't just Sarah's desperate breakdown. It was a coordinated plan involving her sister, which meant there would be no reasoning with her, no appealing to whatever love might remain between them. Rex seemed to understand that the situation had shifted to a more dangerous level. The dog's hackles rose and his protective rumbling became more pronounced. He began making small advances toward Sarah, not attacking, but clearly establishing that he would not allow her to approach Marcus with the pepper spray. Sarah noticed Rex's more aggressive posture and raised the spray bottle again, aiming directly at the dog's eyes. "I warned you this would happen if you didn't cooperate," she said to Marcus. "Now your precious dog is going to suffer because you won't just accept what needs to happen." Before Marcus could respond, Sarah pressed the trigger on the pepper spray. But Rex's training and instincts served him well. The moment he saw her finger move, the dog dove to one side, avoiding the worst of the chemical cloud while simultaneously launching himself toward Sarah's legs. The impact wasn't meant to harm her, but Rex was a large, powerful animal moving with desperate purpose. Sarah stumbled backward, dropping the pepper spray as she tried to maintain her balance. For a terrifying moment, she teetered near the cliff edge herself, arms windmilling as she fought to stay upright. Rex immediately disengaged and returned to Marcus's side, though some of the pepper spray had caught him on the shoulder and left side of his face. The dog's left eye was streaming, and he shook his head periodically to clear his vision, but he never wavered in his protective stance. Sarah regained her footing and stared at Rex with a mixture of fear and rage. "That dog is vicious," she declared, though anyone watching the encounter would have seen that Rex had shown remarkable restraint. "He attacked me, That's going to be part of the story. The dangerous service dog that caused the accident. Marcus realized with growing horror that Sarah had already constructed a complete narrative to explain his death. In her version, Rex would be blamed for somehow causing Marcus to lose control of his wheelchair near the unstable cliff edge. The dog would probably be put down as a dangerous animal, eliminating the only witness to what really happened. "You've thought this through completely, haven't you?" Marcus said, his voice heavy with betrayal and disbelief. "Every detail planned out in advance." "I had to," Sarah replied, her composure returning now that she had regained her footing. "Linda helped me work through all the possibilities. We couldn't leave anything to chance." She began moving toward Marcus again, more cautiously this time, but with clear intent. Rex intercepted her path immediately, though Marcus could see the dog was struggling with the effects of the pepper spray. Rex's left eye was nearly swollen shut, and he was breathing heavily through his mouth to avoid the irritating chemical residue around his nose. "Even with one good eye, he's still too protective," Sarah muttered, looking around for another solution. Her gaze fell on a large piece of driftwood that had somehow made its way up to the cliff top, probably carried by an exceptionally high tide during a recent storm. Marcus watched in dismay as Sarah picked up the weathered branch, testing its weight and balance. Rex saw the improvised weapon and immediately positioned himself between Sarah and the wheelchair, despite his compromised vision and breathing difficulties. "Sarah, stop this madness," Marcus shouted, no longer trying to keep his voice calm. "You're talking about murdering your husband and probably killing an innocent animal. This isn't who you are. You don't know who I am," she screamed back, raising the piece of driftwood like a club. "You never bothered to find out. You were so wrapped up in your military career, your sense of duty, your noble sacrifice that you never once asked what I wanted from life." The accusation stung because there was truth in it. Marcus had been focused on his service, confident that Sarah would be there when he returned, assuming her love would be strong enough to weather any challenges they might face. He had never seriously considered that his injuries might fundamentally change not just his life, but hers as well. But even if he bore some responsibility for their marital problems, nothing justified what Sarah was planning to do. Rex made a decision that demonstrated the depth of his loyalty and intelligence. Instead of waiting for Sarah to attack, the dog launched himself directly at the piece of driftwood, grabbing it in his powerful jaws and trying to wrestle it away from her. His compromised vision made the maneuver risky, but Rex seemed to understand that disarming Sarah was more important than his own safety. The struggle was brief, but intense. Sarah tried to maintain her grip on the makeshift weapon while Rex shook his head violently, using his body weight and training to control the threat. The pepper spray had weakened him, but the dog's determination was absolute. During the struggle, Marcus began wheeling his chair toward the parking area as quickly as possible. His upper body strength, developed through months of physical therapy, allowed him to build momentum even on the slightly uneven surface of the viewing area. Sarah noticed his escape attempt and abandoned her fight with Rex, dropping the driftwood and lunging toward the wheelchair. "You're not going anywhere," she shouted. But Rex had anticipated this move. Despite his injuries, the dog threw himself between Sarah and the moving wheelchair, his body serving as a living barrier. Sarah tried to push past him, but Rex's bulk and determination made it impossible. Frustrated and desperate, Sarah made a critical error. She grabbed the handles of Marcus's wheelchair from behind, intending to physically control his movement and push him toward the cliff edge. It was exactly the kind of direct attack that Rex had been trained to prevent. The dog's response was immediate and devastating. Rex spun around and latched onto Sarah's wrist with his teeth, not trying to cause maximum damage but applying enough pressure to force her to release the wheelchair handles. Sarah screamed and tried to pull away, but Rex held firm, his training overriding any reluctance to bite a human. "Let go of me," Sarah shrieked, beating at Rex's head with her free hand. "Let go." Marcus had stopped wheeling and turned to see the confrontation. "Rex, release," he commanded, not wanting the situation to escalate to serious violence even though Sarah clearly intended to kill him. The dog obeyed immediately. Releasing Sarah's wrist and backing away to resume his protective position, Sarah cradled her injured arm, staring at the bite marks with shock and rage. "That animal is completely out of control," she declared, though the bite had been precisely measured to disable rather than maim. "When they investigate your accident, Rex's attack on me will be all the evidence they need to understand what happened. Marcus realized that Sarah's twisted logic made Rex's protective actions work in her favor. Every time the dog defended him, she could claim it as evidence that the animal was dangerous and unpredictable. In her constructed narrative, Rex would be the villain who caused the tragic accident that claimed Marcus's life. But Rex wasn't finished fighting. The dog had endured pepper spray and physical combat, but his protective instincts remained as strong as ever. As Sarah began approaching the wheelchair again, Rex made a sound Marcus had never heard before, a deep, resonant growl that seemed to come from the very core of the animal's being. It was the sound of a creature prepared to fight to the death to protect his pack leader. Sarah heard it too, and for the first time since the confrontation began, genuine fear flickered across her face. She was beginning to understand that Rex would never stop defending Marcus. No matter what she did to him, the standoff continued, with Sarah holding her injured wrist and glaring at Rex with murderous intent, while the dog maintained his protective stance despite his own injuries. Marcus sat between them, knowing that his faithful companion was the only thing standing between him and a 300-foot fall to the rocks below. The confrontation had reached a deadly stalemate. Sarah's wrist was bleeding from Rex's bite, but her determination to complete her murderous plan hadn't wavered. The dog stood guard despite his injuries from the pepper spray, his breathing labored but his resolve unshakable. Marcus knew that time was running out. Sarah was growing more desperate by the minute, and desperate people made dangerous mistakes. "This has gone on long enough," Sarah declared, pulling her phone from her pocket with her uninjured hand. "Linda is expecting an update, and I'm not going to disappoint her." She began typing a message, keeping one eye on Rex while she worked. Marcus could see her thumbs moving rapidly across the screen, and he had a sinking feeling that she was asking Linda for advice on how to handle the complications that Rex represented. The response came quickly, and Sarah's face darkened as she read it. "Linda says there's a tranquilizer gun in the emergency kit in my car," she announced, "for dealing with injured wildlife that might be dangerous to hikers." She thought of everything. Marcus felt his blood turn cold. If Sarah had access to a tranquilizer gun, she could disable Rex without getting close enough for the dog to defend himself. Once Rex was unconscious, nothing would prevent her from pushing Marcus over the cliff edge. "Sarah, listen to me," Marcus said urgently. "Even if you go through with this, do you really think Linda is going to let you live with this secret? She's already involved in planning a murder. What makes you think she won't eventually see you as a liability?" For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across Sarah's face. Marcus pressed his advantage. "Think about it. Linda encouraged you to kill me, helped you plan every detail, and now she's providing weapons to make it happen. Does that sound like someone who cares about your well-being? Or someone who's using you to solve a problem?" "Linda loves me," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "She's the only family I have left who understands what I'm going through." "Linda sees an opportunity," Marcus countered. "Get rid of the disabled husband, collect the insurance money, and have a sister who's completely dependent on her because of what they did together. You'll never be free of Linda after this, Sarah. She'll own you forever." Rex was watching the conversation intently, his head turning between Marcus and Sarah as if following their words. The dog's protective stance hadn't relaxed, but Marcus could see that Rex was struggling with the effects of the pepper spray. His left eye was completely swollen shut now, and he was favoring his left front paw where some of the chemical had apparently dripped. Sarah seemed to consider Marcus's words for a moment before shaking her head violently. "No, you're just trying to manipulate me. Linda and I planned this together because we both knew it was the only solution. You can't talk your way out of this, Marcus." She began walking toward the parking area, moving carefully to avoid triggering another protective response from Rex. "I'll be back in 5 minutes with the tranquilizer gun. Then this will all be over." As soon as Sarah disappeared from view, Marcus began wheeling his chair toward the parking area as rapidly as possible. Rex limped alongside, his injury clearly causing pain but not slowing his protective instincts. The dog kept looking back toward the path Sarah had taken, clearly expecting her to return at any moment. Marcus's military training kicked in as he assessed their tactical situation. The parking area was completely exposed with no cover or concealment. Sarah's car was positioned to block the exit road, so even if he could somehow get to their vehicle, she could prevent their escape. His cell phone had no signal this far from town, and there were no other hikers visible in any direction. Their only advantage was Rex's continued alertness despite his injuries, and Marcus's own upper body strength that allowed him to move the wheelchair faster than Sarah might expect. But those advantages would evaporate the moment she returned with the tranquilizer gun. "Rex," Marcus said quietly, "we need to get out of here, boy. Can you keep going?" The dog looked up at him with his one good eye, and Marcus saw intelligence, determination, and absolute loyalty in that gaze. Rex might be injured, but he wasn't defeated. The dog moved to the front of the wheelchair and began leading the way, toward a hiking trail that branched off from the main viewing area. Marcus had noticed the trail earlier, but dismissed it as too rough for wheelchair access. Now, looking more carefully, he realized it might be their only escape route. The path was narrow and rocky, but it appeared to wind down the cliff face in a series of switchbacks. If they could get far enough down the trail before Sarah returned, they might find a place to hide or at least make her approach more difficult. The first few yards of the trail were manageable, with Marcus using his hands to control the wheelchair's descent while Rex scouted ahead. But as the path grew steeper and more treacherous, Marcus realized they were trading one danger for another. A wrong move could send him tumbling down the cliff just as surely as Sarah's push would. Rex seemed to understand the difficulty and began positioning himself on the downhill side of the wheelchair, using his body to help brake and guide their descent. The dog's training had included mobility assistance, but this was far beyond anything they had practiced together. Behind them, Marcus heard the sound of a car door slamming, followed by Sarah's voice calling his name. She had discovered their absence and was searching the viewing area. It wouldn't take her long to notice the trail leading down the cliff face. "Marcus," Sarah's voice carried on the wind, artificially sweet but with an underlying edge of panic. "Where are you?" "I have a surprise for you." Rex's hackles rose at the sound of her voice, but the dog remained focused on helping Marcus navigate the increasingly difficult terrain. They had made it perhaps 50 yards down the trail when Marcus heard footsteps above them. Sarah had found the trail entrance and was beginning her pursuit. The path took a sharp turn around a rocky outcropping, temporarily hiding them from view above. Marcus realized this might be their best opportunity to find a defensive position. A small cave or overhang in the cliff face could provide cover and force Sarah to approach them directly, negating some of the advantage her tranquilizer gun provided. Rex seemed to have the same idea. The dog left the trail and began exploring a jumble of large boulders that had fallen from the cliff face above. After a moment, Rex returned and led Marcus to a narrow gap between two massive rocks that provided concealment from above, while still allowing them to see anyone approaching on the trail. It wasn't a perfect hiding spot, but it was the best they could manage given the circumstances. Marcus maneuvered his wheelchair into the rocky shelter while Rex positioned himself at the entrance, ready to defend their position despite his injuries. From their hiding place, they could hear Sarah making her way down the trail, cursing as she struggled with the uneven terrain while carrying the tranquilizer gun. Her progress was slow and noisy, giving them advance warning of her approach. "I know you're down here somewhere," Sarah called out, her artificial sweetness completely gone now. "This is only making things worse, Marcus. I was going to make it quick and painless, but now you're just prolonging everyone's suffering." Rex remained absolutely silent, his one good eye fixed on the trail where Sarah would eventually appear. The dog's breathing was still labored from the pepper spray, but his focus was complete. Marcus reached down to stroke Rex's neck, feeling the tension in the animal's muscles as he prepared for whatever came next. They didn't have long to wait. Sarah's figure appeared around the rocky outcropping, moving carefully down the trail with the tranquilizer gun held ready. She was scanning the area methodically, and Marcus knew it was only a matter of time before she spotted their hiding place. When she did, the final confrontation would begin, and Marcus wasn't sure that even Rex's courage and loyalty would be enough to save them from the weapon Sarah now carried. Sarah spotted their hiding place within minutes. Her eyes locked onto the gap between the boulders where Marcus's wheelchair was partially visible, and a cold smile spread across her face. "There you are," she said, raising the tranquilizer gun. "I have to admit, I'm impressed you made it this far down the trail. But this is where it ends, Marcus." Rex immediately moved to the front of their shelter, placing himself between Sarah and Marcus despite the impossible odds. The dog's one good eye never left the weapon in Sarah's hands, and Marcus could see Rex calculating distances and angles, looking for any opportunity to protect his handler. "The first dart is for Rex," Sarah announced, taking careful aim. "Then I'll help you back up to the cliff edge where you belong." Linda was right. Sometimes you have to be willing to get your hands dirty to get what you want in life. But as Sarah prepared to fire, the sound of voices drifted down from the parking area above. Multiple voices calling out and searching. Sarah's face went pale as she realized they were no longer alone on the clifftop. "Sarah Thompson? This is the sheriff's department. We need to speak with you." The voice was authoritative and carried the unmistakable tone of law enforcement. Sarah spun around, looking back up the trail with panic in her eyes. Somehow, the authorities had discovered her plan, or at least become suspicious enough to investigate. "Mrs. Thompson, we know you're here. Your sister Linda contacted us with some very concerning information. We need you to come up to the parking area immediately." Marcus felt a surge of hope mixed with confusion. Linda had contacted the police? The same Linda who had helped plan his murder was now apparently turning Sarah into the authorities. Sarah's reaction was pure rage. "That backstabbing witch," she snarled. "She set me up. She planned this whole thing and then called the cops to make sure she stayed clean." Marcus realized his earlier warning to Sarah had been more accurate than he knew. Linda had indeed been using her sister, manipulating Sarah into attempting murder while positioning herself to avoid any legal consequences. By calling the police at the crucial moment, Linda could claim she had tried to prevent the crime while still hoping to benefit from Marcus's death. "You have to understand," Sarah said desperately, turning back to Marcus with the tranquilizer gun still in her hands. "I can't go to prison. I won't survive in prison. This has to end the way we planned, or Linda wins everything." Rex sensed the renewed threat and tensed for action, but Marcus knew the dog couldn't reach Sarah before she fired the dart. Their hiding place had become a trap, with nowhere to retreat and no way to escape. "Sarah Thompson, this is your final warning. Come up to the parking area now or we're coming down to get you." The voices above were getting closer, and Marcus could hear multiple sets of footsteps beginning to descend the trail. Sarah was running out of time to complete her plan, which made her more dangerous than ever. "I'm sorry it has to be this way," Sarah said, her finger tightening on the trigger of the tranquilizer gun. "But I won't let Linda destroy my life completely." The dart flew from the gun with a soft pop, aimed directly at Rex's chest. But the dog's reflexes, honed by military training and natural instinct, served him one final time. Rex threw himself sideways and the dart struck the rock wall behind him instead of finding its target. Sarah cursed and tried to reload the tranquilizer gun, but Rex was already in motion. Despite his injuries, the dog launched himself from their rocky shelter in a desperate leap that carried him across the narrow trail. His trajectory was perfect, and he struck Sarah in the midsection with enough force to knock her completely off balance. The impact sent both Sarah and the tranquilizer gun tumbling down the steep slope below the trail. Sarah screamed as she fell, grabbing desperately at rocks and vegetation to slow her descent. Rex had managed to land on a narrow ledge about 15 feet below the trail, but he was clearly injured from the impact and unable to climb back up. Marcus wheeled his chair to the edge of the trail and looked down at the scene below. Sarah had come to rest on a wider ledge about 30 feet down, alive but clearly hurt and unable to climb back up the cliff face. Rex was closer, trapped on his ledge but alert and responsive when Marcus called to him. "Rex, stay boy, help is coming." The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder as the sheriff's deputies made their way down the trail. Within minutes, the first officer appeared around the rocky outcropping, taking in the scene with professional assessment. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Deputy Martinez with the county sheriff's office. Are you injured?" "I'm okay," Marcus replied, "but my dog is trapped on that ledge and my wife fell further down. She was trying to—" Marcus paused, not sure how to explain the situation. "We know what she was trying to do," Deputy Martinez said grimly. "Her sister Linda called us about 2 hours ago. Said she was worried Sarah might try to hurt you and couldn't live with the guilt of staying quiet. Told us the whole plan." 2 more deputies arrived with rescue equipment, and within an hour both Rex and Sarah had been brought back up to safety. Rex was injured but stable, with what appeared to be a broken rib and various cuts and bruises from his fall. Sarah had a broken leg and multiple lacerations, but she would survive to face charges for attempted murder. As paramedics attended to Rex's injuries, Marcus learned the full extent of Linda's betrayal. She had indeed helped plan the murder, but had also secretly recorded several of their conversations as insurance against Sarah. When Linda realized the plan was actually going forward, she called the police and provided them with evidence that would ensure Sarah took full responsibility for the attempted crime. "Your sister-in-law is a piece of work," Deputy Martinez explained as they waited for the helicopter that would transport Rex to the veterinary emergency clinic. "She claims she was never serious about the murder plot, says she was just letting Sarah vent her frustrations and never thought she'd actually go through with it." Marcus wasn't surprised. Linda had manipulated the entire situation to her advantage, encouraging Sarah to attempt murder while protecting herself from any legal consequences. Sarah would face decades in prison. Linda would inherit any assets that couldn't be traced to the murder plot, and Marcus would have been dead if not for Rex's intervention. The helicopter arrived as the sun was setting, painting the clifftop in shades of orange and red. As Rex was loaded onto a stretcher for transport to the animal hospital, the dog managed to lift his head and look at Marcus with his one good eye. In that gaze, Marcus saw everything he needed to know about loyalty, courage, and unconditional love. "You saved my life, boy," Marcus whispered, stroking Rex's head gently. "You saved my life in every way that matters." 6 months later, Marcus sat on a different deck overlooking a different view, not the ocean, but a peaceful lake surrounded by pine trees. Rex lay beside his wheelchair, fully recovered from his injuries and wearing a Medal of Honor from the local veterans organization. The dog's left eye had suffered permanent damage from the pepper spray, leaving him partially blind, but it hadn't diminished his spirit or his devotion to Marcus. Sarah was serving a 20-year sentence for attempted murder, and Linda was under investigation for conspiracy and insurance fraud. The house on the cliff had been sold, and Marcus had used the proceeds to buy a smaller, more accessible home near other veterans who understood the challenges he faced. Rex stretched and yawned, then placed his head on Marcus's lap with the contentment of a dog who knew he was exactly where he belonged. Together, they watched the sunset reflect on the calm water. Two warriors who had found peace after surviving the ultimate test of loyalty and love. Marcus had learned that family wasn't just about blood relations or marriage certificates. Sometimes family was a four-legged guardian angel who refused to abandon you even when everyone else did. Rex had shown him that true loyalty wasn't just about standing by someone when times were good. It was about being willing to fight, to sacrifice, and even to die to protect the ones you love. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Marcus made a silent promise to Rex and to himself. He would never again take for granted the gift of unconditional love, and he would spend the rest of his life being worthy of the faith that his faithful companion had placed in him. Some bonds, he now understood, were stronger than any force that might try to break them.